Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the fantasy headliners. We're going to be diving deep into all of the wide receiver statistics, analytics, the deep dive to see who should we start and who should we sit in week 10 of the NFL season. We do have 4 teams on a bye this week. Nothing as crazy as what we've seen so far this season. Still lots of good options that we're going to talk through. But before I jump into our first matchup of the week, we have got another giveaway sponsored by our friends over at Pristine Auction. And I've got you all an autographed Davante Adams football that we are going to be giving away. And if you want an opportunity to win, number one, first and foremost, to be eligible for any of our giveaways, you got to head over to pristineauction.com and you need to create a new account using code word headliners. It's absolutely free to do. And if you do that, you're going to get a $10 coupon from Pristine Auction to use on your first purchase. And let me tell you what, you're going to be bidding on some stuff because they've got fabulous things there. But then after that, all you got to do, hit the like button, subscribe, comment down below. We're going to pick someone that comments on the video to be eligible for that Davante Adams autographed football. So make sure you get all of those steps done. Well, we got to hop into it. We got to talk about Thursday night football. There's a lot going on this week. Who are we going to be putting into our lineup? Well, for Thursday night football, it's going to be basically nobody. Well, for the Atlanta Falcons anyway, because here's the thing. Atlanta loves to run the football, and Carolina loves to give up rushing yards to running backs. It's a match made in heaven. But not for the wide receivers. Unfortunately, Drake London, Zacchaeus are both going to be sits for me this week. Neither of them doing much of anything recently. And in this matchup, doesn't call for us to get risky with them. Atlanta allows the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. And it's hard to anticipate what is going to happen here because Atlanta does allow a lot of points to wide receivers. But what PJ Walker are we going to get? Is it going to be the guy from, the last 2 to 3 weeks ago, where we saw him make DJ Moore the wide receiver 2 in fantasy football? Or is it going to be last week where everything completely went in the toilet and Baker Mayfield had to come try to save the day in the second half when the game was far too gone? I would love to start Terrace Marshall here. I would absolutely love to. But I'm probably going to pass unless I'm desperate. And I've got an X factor there of 1 and an X factor of 2 for DJ Moore just because I don't know if PJ Walker is going to get it done this week going up against Atlanta. Again, they do give up some big plays and things like that. But on a Thursday night matchup, to me, there's just something kind of gross about this. So I'm being cautious with both of them. Seattle at Tampa Bay. And I don't know if we're going to see Tom Brady throw the ball almost 60 times this week, but it is going to be a tougher matchup going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Let's start on the Seattle side first. Now, Tampa Bay did a good job of slowing down the Los Angeles Rams last week, and the Los Angeles Rams, for the most part, have been very up and down on offense. So was it Tampa Bay's defense still doing a decent job even after some injuries, or was it just the LA Rams being that bad? I think you could debate either side of that. Seattle has been much more efficient, though, this season. And Geno Smith, even though people continue to wait for really the floor to just fall out from underneath him, he's got at least 2 passing touchdowns in every single game this season, but 2. And Tampa Bay has allowed the 7th most receptions to wide receivers this season. To me, this feels like safe games for Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Seattle allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are going to be starts. It's hard not to start them, especially when you look at the numbers and see that Chris Godwin is top 12 among wide receivers in targets per game. Mike Evans is top 24 in wide receivers in terms of points per game and targets per game. And when you have that, you kind of have to throw them in there if you own them. To me, this week, they might be more like low-end wide receiver 2-esque type of plays. Seattle's allowed the 6th fewest receiving yards to wide receivers, and the wide receivers just look off right now. We got drop passes. They don't seem to be on the same page as Tom Brady. The offense as a whole just doesn't seem to be clicking. So even though we're starting Godwin and Evans this week, we're being very cautious with what we might get from it. Minnesota at Buffalo, and this is probably going to be a tougher matchup for Minnesota. But even with that being said, they're probably going to have to throw it a little bit. So Justin Jefferson, we're going to keep running that guy out there. For Adam Thielen, though, he is going to be moving to being a sit this week for me with the addition of TJ Hawkinson and this being a tougher matchup for the wide receivers. I'm just going to go ahead and put him in the back seat right now and just I'm going to let Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson maybe take over a little bit this week, and we might see Dalvin Cook get a little bit more involved as well. For the Buffalo Bills, Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. Now, Minnesota allows the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers, and they allow 13.9 yards per reception. That to me right there speaks to a Gabe Davis matchup. Now, the elbow injury for old Josh Allen might be a little bit of a concern, and maybe we don't see him go deep nearly as often as what we might think in a particular game where he's feeling a little bit more healthy. In this instance, though, with Gabe Davis, really all he needs is one big play to be fantasy viable for the day. You give this guy a 50, 60-yard touchdown, right there, you're going to be looking at anywhere from 11 to 12 points, and you're going to be set with Gabe Davis. So the upside is there. Obviously, he'll continue to be risky. If you're worried about the elbow injury, I would understand as well. It seems like it's going to be okay, though. It seems like he's going to be playing through it and be just fine. But make sure you tune in later in the week for Dr. Ethan Turner's injury show so we can figure out if there's more that we need to be worried about. Detroit and Chicago, and Justin Fields coming off just an absolutely huge game, a majority of which was on the ground. But what's that going to mean against a Detroit defense that actually looked capable of playing NFL football last week? We'll see if they can keep it up. For the Chicago Bears defense, they got torched by Miami last week. Another big game by Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle, if he didn't drop a pass, would have had an even bigger game last week. The loss of Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn, that's going to eat at this defense a little bit. If Jared Goff gets some time, if he stays clean in the pocket, which, losing those two guys is where that's going to help out, he should be able to find Amon-Ra St. Brown more than enough to make him a start this week. For Khalif Raymond, I've got him here instead of Josh Reynolds this week. Josh Reynolds obviously has been banged up for multiple weeks, but Khalif Raymond kind of has taken over as the wide receiver 2 for right now, and always keep an eye on when Jameson Williams may end up being back. From Mooney and Chase Claypool, I'm actually going to get a little crazy this week. I'm getting a little too cute here with this one. But Detroit allows the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, even though they looked a lot better last week. But was that Detroit, or was that Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers? Again, lots of questions with that one. But here's the thing. With this defense this year, who are some guys that have struggled against the Detroit defense? Guys like Terry McLaurin and Davante Smith, like burst wide receivers, speed wide receivers, guys that can win all over the field, those agile type of guys that don't really battle for the football as much as like an Allen Lazard or an A.J. Brown. It's bigger wide receivers that it feels like Detroit's had more issues trying to defend this season. So I'm going to step back from Darnell Mooney this week, and I'm going to go with Chase Claypool as a start. Now, Darnell Mooney, based on upside alone and this matchup, he will probably be within my top 36 wide receivers. Because again, when I do rankings, I try to do them based on what I feel like a player's upside is going to be. So for Darnell Mooney, he's still got good upside because again, this is a good matchup. But if you take a look at the wide receivers Detroit has struggled with this year, they lean more towards the Chase Claypool type. And now that he's been here for a week, he's gotten a little bit more integrated into the offense. Cole Kmet and Chase Claypool could be the guys that Justin Fields looks to the most in Week 10. Jacksonville and Kansas City is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. If you're looking for some goodies for Christmas, looking to fill that stocking, or you need something for yourself, head to manscaped.com. Use code word headliners at checkout. You're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Now, for Jacksonville, Kansas City, Christian Kirk and Zay Jones are both going to be starts for me this week. Both of these teams are in the top 10 of most points allowed to wide receivers. Kirk obviously set up for a big game. He continues to be the number 1 target in this offense. He's scoring touchdowns, and we've started to see a little bit of a bump in his volume as of recent in these numbers, meaning he's getting more targets per game, which is good to see. Now, for Zay Jones, he's going to have a much lower ceiling for me, but based on the targets that he has seen this year, in a game against Kansas City, I think we're going to see some Zay Jones action this week as well. For Juju Smith-Schuster, he's going to be a star. He's clearly the number 2 in this offense now. He's really picked up his game over the last 3 games, and it's great to see him and Patrick Mahomes making a connection. We're starting him without a doubt in this matchup. Mecole Hardman is going to be a start for me this week. All right, I'll cave, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you that love Mecole Hardman, I get it, but keep this in mind. If you start Hardman and he doesn't score, you might be in for a little bit of trouble. The bottom kind of drops out of his performances with no touchdowns, especially if you are out there thinking that Kadarius Toney is going to make any type of an impact. If he does, it's going to come at the expense of Mecole Hardman. Cleveland and Miami is going to have a whole lot of starts for me this week as well. Amari Cooper, he's kind of been the silent fantasy assassin this year. If you drafted him, it is ADP. You've gotten more than enough return on his value. We get him back from the bye this week. Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to be a start for me. He is doing work under the radar as well. He has at least 70 receiving yards in 4 of his last 5 games, and now he gets Miami, who allows a pretty decent amount of fantasy points to wide receivers. On the Miami side, I mean, Hill's on a record-setting pace. Waddle continues to be very good. This is my question, though. Why are people always asking me, should you start Jalen Waddle? I have never seen people ask me more questions about a wide receiver 1 than I have Jalen Waddle this entire season. Jalen Waddle had 2 tough games this year against Cincinnati and the New York Jets. Both of those teams are pretty darn good at stopping wide receivers. He struggled against both of them, but he has 80 receiving yards in 2 games and 100 receiving yards in the other 2 games since then, and he's also scored 3 touchdowns. It's just 2 games that he's had issues with, ladies and gentlemen. You are starting Jalen Waddle. I don't want to have to say it again. From a matchup with a lot of opportunity to a matchup with not nearly as much. Houston and the New York Giants. The Giants allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So here's the thing. Brandon Cooks hate the Texans, and, Collins is hurt. So Nico Collins, Brandon Cooks, are either of these guys even going to be playing this week? Are you really going to take a shot with like Moore or Dorsett, who stepped in as the wide receiver 1 and 2 last week? I mean, honestly, in this matchup, I probably don't even start Brandon Cooks, even if I knew for sure he would be playing this week. The Giants have allowed the 7th fewest receptions and the 5th fewest receiving yards to wide receivers this year. Now on the New York Giants side, Kenny Golladay sounds like he's starting to get back to practice. Does that make that much of a difference, though? I don't know. We'll see. Probably not. Houston allows the 5th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Now, a lot of that has to do with just how bad they are against the run. People are running against them constantly, and it's working. So there hasn't been that big of a need to throw the football. But in this matchup, even though I've got Wan'Dale Robinson as a sit, the numbers here, they don't show him as a start, right? The numbers here, they don't add up to 15. He is a high-risk start for me. The thing is that if you play him, it's more of like a PPR league, and you've got to hope for probably anywhere between 8 to 10 targets. He may not score. Houston's only allowed 3 touchdowns all season to wide receivers, and I think New York's going to be running the ball quite a bit. So you're really hoping for just a lot of targets, and you hope maybe he breaks off one big play or 2. New Orleans and Pittsburgh is a very interesting matchup for me this week. Pittsburgh allows the most fantasy points to wide receivers. They have allowed the most touchdowns at 13 to wide receivers and the 3rd most receiving yards to wide receivers. So why are we not starting more people from the New Orleans Saints? I will be honest with you. It's because they don't have anybody out of Chris Olave. Jarvis Landry was trying to work his way back. I don't know if he'll get back this week. We'll keep an eye on it. Yes, Chris Olave was a bust last week, but he has a much better matchup this week, a much better opportunity. We know, obviously, Michael Thomas done for the year. Traquan Smith, he's kind of wide receiver 2-ish right now. They're filtering guys in and out of there. So even though it's a really good matchup, the only guy I can count on right now is going to be Chris Olave. Now, for Pittsburgh, I'm going to go with George Pickens over Deontay Johnson this week. If you toss out Pickens' Week 8 performance right before the bye where he had 3 targets, didn't catch any of those passes, if you toss that out the door, Pickens has at least 60 receiving yards in 3 of his last 4 games and at least 6 targets in his last 5. So the potential for production is there because the volume has been there. Deontay Johnson just doesn't see big plays. I mean, you can see it by the numbers there. His volume is a 4. It means he's top 24 in terms of targets per game. His production's a 1, which would mean on a per game basis, he's like in the 50s. That's a pretty big discrepancy there. I'm not risking it. I'm going to go with George Pickens this week. It's a decent matchup for him, I believe, and I think coming out of the bye, Kenny Pickett's going to be looking his way. Denver and Tennessee, and Denver coming out of the bye. This is the matchup that I believe that they needed. The Tennessee Titans allow the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. And, based on the matchup, I know it's been tough for us to do. We're going to go with Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy both as starts this week. Tennessee allows the 6th most receiving yards to wide receivers, and they've allowed the 4th most touchdowns. In fact, I like this matchup so much that Jerry Jeudy is going to be my prize picks prop to play this week, and I'm going to take the over of 49.5 receiving yards against Tennessee. On the Tennessee side, we've got nothing. You've got Robert Woods. Denver allows the fewest fantasy points to wide receiver. Tennessee already can't throw the ball with Malik Willis. They've only allowed 1 touchdown all year, the Denver Broncos, to wide receivers, and the least amount of passing yards. If you're starting anybody from Tennessee this week, not named Derrick Henry, just cash it in. You're spent. Indianapolis at Las Vegas, and I know this is going to take some convincing, and some of you in the comments are going to tell me how crazy I am, especially if you only watch the video right now, or you only look at the graphics and you don't watch the video. You tattle on yourselves in the comments when you do that, ladies and gentlemen. Most of you are not going to want to start Pittman, but hear me out. I'm going to have him lower in the rankings this week. But the problem is not the volume, it's the scoring. He hasn't scored since week 1, which obviously is not great. But he has at least 8 targets in all but 2 games this season. And overall in the season, he's tied for 6th in targets and 5th in receiving yards. If you don't have somebody with higher upside, I am still going to run Michael Pittman out there. I'm going to do it. He's a low-end wide receiver 2 for me based on the potential volume alone. He's a 5 in volume, ladies and gentlemen. Top 12 in the league in targets per game. We have got to go with him. If you own him and you do not have a higher upside option, yes, you might be worried about where his floor actually lays, and it might not be great, but the potential for production is just too much with the amount of volume he is seeing. And for me, with this new coaching staff coming in this week, my thought is get the ball to your best player. That's Michael Pittman. For Las Vegas, Indianapolis allows the 2nd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So this is a very tough matchup, but we're still going to run Davante Adams out there. Hopefully Derek Carr just brings his A game against Indy this week. If he does, Davante Adams should be fine. If he doesn't, you're probably going to see him on the studs list next week. For Dallas and Green Bay is allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but they just lost Rashawn Gary, one of their top pass rushers. So maybe that pass rush is not going to be quite where we would like it this week. If that ends up happening, going to give Dak a little bit more time to throw and should give CeeDee Lamb enough time to get open. Now, I don't know where Jair Alexander is going to be. That's kind of the question mark here. Is he going to stay outside on Michael Gallup the entire game, or is he going to kind of shadow CeeDee Lamb a little bit more? If he does, Lamb's upside clearly going to be a little bit lower, but if he doesn't, we could see a couple big plays here or there from CeeDee Lamb. For Green Bay, Lazard, Christian Watson, Sammy Watkins, I mean, who do we really want to trust here? For me, it is nobody. I don't want to trust anybody here. Lazard's a risky start for me this week because he might see some Travion Diggs. And yes, I've taken some digs at Diggs in the past. See what I did there? But for this week, going up against a guy like Allen Lazard, Travion Diggs should end up being just fine. We'll need a touchdown from him or it will be a bust. Arizona and the LA Rams, and the Rams have actually allowed 250 or more passing yards in all but 3 games this season. We are going to be putting DeAndre Hopkins in our lineup for sure, and Rondale Moore will make it back to being a start for me this week. The Rams defense is prone to some big plays here or there, and Rondale Moore fits that description. And for those of you that were worried about for Robbie Anderson, listen, you don't need to be, okay? The dude's played quite a bit. He's not seeing any targets. Rondale Moore and DeAndre Hopkins are the guys, along with Zach Ertz. For the LA Rams, I mean, I'd love to see Van Jefferson get more involved. That might take a little bit more time. Okay targets last week, no receptions. Allen Robinson continues to be a bust. And obviously with Cooper Kupp, he's obviously slotted in to wide receiver 1. The Chargers and 49ers, Keenan Allen dealing with that hammy again. Mike Williams banged up. Palmer balled out last week with neither of those guys there. And this is not a bad matchup. You know, this is a pretty good matchup here. So the opportunity for Palmer still exists. But San Francisco can be tough at times. And that's why I say it's a pretty good matchup, because they've given up quite a few fantasy points to wide receivers, but they also have a very good, they have very good instincts in terms of just shutting things down at times as well. The 49ers defense is pretty good. We'll see if Palmer can be a little bit boom or bust this week. Hopefully a little bit more towards boom. But for me, I'm kind of trying to hinge right in the middle, knowing that the targets could be there, but maybe not the upside. We'll keep an eye on DeAndre Carter as well. If Allen can't go again, we'll see. We'll revisit that in the ranking show to see if DeAndre Carter should be a start. And for Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, you know, Deebo was banged up before the bye. We'll see how he's feeling. But Brandon Ayuk from week 6 to 8 has been looking really good. 3rd in targets, 4th in receptions, 9th in yards, and 3rd in touchdowns among wide receivers, while also being the wide receiver 3. We saw him heating up before the bye. This is a guy that, even with the addition of Christian McCaffrey, having George Kittle and having Deebo Samuel, it's going to be some of those big plays that we look to, and having all those guys there should only open up down the field even more. Monday Night Football, Washington and Philadelphia. Philadelphia has allowed the 2nd fewest yards to wide receivers this season, and I really don't know if Taylor Heinicke is going to have what it takes to make things work for us. Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin, both of these guys are going to be sits this week. One of them might pop off for a pretty decent game, but going up against Philadelphia, I don't want to risk it on Monday night. I just want to get my points before Monday Night Football gets here. Unless you own A.J. Brown and Davante Smith. Washington's allowed the 4th most yards to wide receivers. A.J. Brown set up for another big game here. Smith is going to be a start because this is a good matchup, but he's way too boom or bust. I mean, he's only passed 50 receiving yards 3 times this year. So if you score great. Is he going to get over 50 receiving yards? Maybe, but he's got like one big game this year, and that's what has made the majority of his season. So unfortunately, Davante Smith just not consistent enough for us to be, you know, super reliant on him. But if you're facing buys, injuries, whatever it may be, need a wide receiver 3, that is where Davante Smith comes into play for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get out of here for the day, though. Hopefully you all enjoyed the wide receiver content. Hit the like button, subscribe below, leave a comment if you got any questions for me. Don't forget to head over to pristineauction.com, create that free account using code word headliner so you can be in the drawing for a Davante Adams autographed ball giveaway. Everybody have a great rest of the day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.